Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the course of English for Academic Communication with me, Maria Dewi Rosari from Jakarta International University, Indonesia. I'm glad that I can meet you again in lecture 9. And for this lecture 9, well, actually also lecture 10, we have a new topic. So one new topic for two meetings, as usual. In lecture 9 and 10, we are going to learn how to conduct academic communication in the setting of classroom teaching. And we will cover this topic in two meetings, in two lectures, lecture 9 and 10. In lecture 9, it will be about the language foundations for classroom teaching, as you can see on the slide here. Meanwhile, for lecture 10, it will be the further application and strategies for classroom teaching. Well, so this material is very essential if you are into, being a teaching assistant. And when in the future you want to be a teacher, language instructor, or even lecturer or professor in a university. All right. And in lecture 10, you will see how to apply the language foundations that we are going to cover today in the real application activities, and also some more guidance on how to execute language foundation for classroom teaching. Well, without further ado, let's find out the learning objectives for this lecture 9. We have quite a lot of things to discuss in this lecture 9. So, as you can see here, we have four main sections, right? But in almost all of the sections, they have subsections, and there are a lot of subsections that we have to cover in lecture 9, right? Because there are a lot of language foundations for various purposes and functions in a classroom teaching, right? To start the lecture, I will introduce you with this unit first. This unit means covering lecture 9 and 10. And then in section 2, it will be, well, actually section 2 up to 4, it will be mastering the mechanics of language. But there are 3 types of it. The first one is holding office hours. And there are 8 subsections, as you can see there, from be inviting for meeting that is not scheduled up to wrapping up. And then in section 3, we have another mastering the mechanics of language section, but it will focus on handling students' questions. Previously, what we learned is how to handle questions in a departmental presentation or in other academic communication settings. Now we will see how to handle questions, but the questions are from students, not from like presentation audience or the participants of a meeting. Last but not least, in number 4, section 4, we have the last mastering the mechanics of language, and it will cover enhancing the clarity of explanations. So as a teacher, teaching assistant included, and also lecturer or professor, we will give a lot of explanations. The explanation is not only about the material of the lecture, but it also about the explanation of terminology, about instructions, so many things, right? So we need to give a lot of explanations during our teaching in a classroom, right? And there are 8 subsections, starting from providing a definition up to providing visual means. And I'll provide you with some useful phrases that you can use, but absolutely they are not the one and only things that you can use in your classroom teaching, because I will ask you to create your own expressions, to develop your own expressions. Maybe you have had experience in being a TA or teaching assistant, and I want you to share your experience. All right, let's start the lecture 9. Before that, I have a very short ice breaking, right? Don't worry if you haven't had any experience in being a teaching assistant, TA, or even a teacher or instructor or sort of things. You can reflect on your experience of being a student in answering this question that I'm going to show you. But if you have had any experience in being TA or the teacher itself, please reflect on the experience you have had so far. And the question is, what can probably be the most common challenges for a teacher in teaching his or her classroom in terms of the use of teaching language? So yeah, I believe that there are many challenges that a teacher faces in a classroom, right? But let's focus on the use of the teaching language. The use of the teaching language can be various. It can be from welcoming the students, it can be from delivering an ice breaking or warming up itself, or giving explanations, giving instruction, assigning homework, or even wrapping up the lesson. So many things of teaching language, right? So you can pick 1, 2, or 3, but write down the most common challenges. You have had experience in being a TA or a teacher, so reflect on your experiences, right? But if you haven't had any, you can, recall your memory when you were attending a class. Can you spot any issues or problems that, shown by your teacher or TA or professor when they were in a classroom? For example, most of my lecturers struggle with providing clear instruction. So the instruction can be ambiguous for the students. And then also, my teachers are not that open with inputs or feedbacks from the students. For example, that's the most common challenge. So don't worry if you haven't had any experience in becoming a TA or teacher. So pause this video for a while to give yourself time to answer this question. All right, stay on slide 3. But if you're done, let's move on to slide 4. Let's start with the first section, which is about unit introduction. Lecture 9, this lecture is devoted to speaking skills in teaching settings, where students' language skills and sensitivity to cultural differences are challenged by their new roles as teaching assistants. So it's not only about the language that we need to use, the expressions that we need to use when teaching, but it's also about how to be sensitive and how to be aware of cultural differences that may exist in our classroom. Well, although our classroom is, consists of students from the same country, but still, like in my country in Indonesia, we are very diverse in culture. So even though all of the students are from Indonesia, for example, but the cultures of the students can be very, very different. The students from the east of Indonesia will have a very different culture from the ones from the west part of Indonesia, like that. So we need to be aware of that, aware of cultural differences, so that we can carry out our teaching well. Exploring hidden assumptions from both the students and the teachers' perspectives is critical in your efforts to develop the speaking repertoire necessary for effective communication in the classroom. So yeah, the goal is to be able to provide effective communication in the classroom. The key components of this lecture are designed to encourage you to experiment with ways to enhance your ability to communicate with students in one-on-one settings, to ask questions that tap into the students' thinking at different levels, to clarify explanations, to handle students' questions, and deal with challenging teaching situations with enhanced confidence. So another thing is to enhancing our confidence in being involved in this kind of communication setting. And the things that we are going to cover, not only in this lecture, but also in lecture 10, are already mentioned there, from asking questions that tap into students thinking at different levels. So we will deal with Bloom taxonomy as well. And then how to clarify explanation, how to handle students' questions, and many other things about the language foundations in classroom setting. The functional language for delivering a lecture is covered in the mechanics of language section in this lecture. The mechanics can be applied in both TA situations where you need to deliver a lecture to students, or at a teaching demonstration during your campus visit for an interview. Yes, that's correct. But I think the use of the material in lecture 9 and 10 are not limited to that only. If later one day you are, into a training department of a company, right? So you will need to conduct a teaching as well. Maybe it's not called teaching, but training, right? So if you are taking a part in an HR department or human resource department, there will be a department called training department, right, under the HR. And if you are assigned to that department, you will need to master the mechanics of the language in today's material, because although it's a training for employees, it's still a teaching though, and we need the language foundations, right? The strategies for success section include suggestions for bridging culture or language gaps, vocabulary strategies to maintain fluency during speaking, and pointers in facilitating discussions that promote dialogical exchanges. Okay, I have another question for you. What do you think are the basics of teaching language a teacher needs to master to teach well? So the basics here, the basic knowledge of a teacher in terms of language, they are teaching language. So what do you think? The basics of teaching language that your teacher, you can address these questions from the perspective of your teacher needs to master so that they can be deemed a good teacher, or they can be having the ability to teach well. Please mention at least five basics of teaching language, right? And write it down on the left side of left part of the slide 6. You may pause this video to give yourself time to complete the box there. Whenever you're ready, continue the video, and we will see another points in unit introduction. So there are some mechanics of language we need to master in teaching. They include mechanics of language for holding office hours. So there are many things that can happen during office hours of a teacher. For example, a student that drops by the teacher's room without any schedule or appointment, or when the students, try to make appointment with you. So what are the language that we need to use? How to handle students' questions. And the questions can be questions that are very related to the material and not related to it. So how to handle that kind of question, and how to enhance the clarity of explanations. If we are not being clear in our explanations, our students may end up, doing something else that is not expected, or that is not aimed at the lesson, right? So that's why we need to cover those things. And we will start it from the second section, which is the next slide. We will start with mastering the mechanics of language under the subsection of holding office hours. Holding office hours is one of the many usual duties that teaching assistants have. As crucial links between the course instructor and the students, teaching assistants are expected to be available for questions and to be responsive to reasonable requests that will help students learn. So they have to be responsive, right? Whenever their students have questions or maybe confusion for the assignments or for the material learned in the class, and they have to be ready to overhelp. Office time is a means of strengthening that important link, and is important because it provides opportunities for you to interact with students individually and to offer one-on-one assistance. Here are some common phrases for interactions during office hours. Try modifying the expressions provided here or adding some of your own language for these interactions. So as usual, I will ask you to make your own expressions for many different types of mechanics of language, right? You can either modify some of the expressions discussed previously, or you can make a brand new expression that is very or completely different from the one listed, right? At least come up with one or two expressions, or maybe you can write down the expressions that you usually use but are not listed in the boxes in my PowerPoint slides. Let's start from the first subsection, which is about how to be inviting in holding office hours. Teaching assistants, or TAs, are often advised to keep their doors open during office hours to make it easy for students to locate their TAs, and also easy for TAs to keep meetings professionals. Check with the university or department's TA guidelines, or consult with your supervising professor if you are uncertain about proper conduct when you meet individual students during office hours or for a coffee. So different institution, different university may have different rules. For example, some universities may not allow you as a TA to have a one-on-one consultation with your student over a coffee. For example, your student is asking you for a consultation and they invite you for a cup of coffee in a coffee shop nearby. Well, some institutions are just fine with that, but some others are not. Meaning that for every consultation, for every one-on-one meeting with the TA should be conducted in the office, like if it is in a like in a room, the door should be open, kind of thing. And that's very various from one department or even one university to another. So make sure that you check the TA guidelines. Make sure that you provide consultation or assistance to your students by following the guidelines from your institution. So here are some of the phrases that we can use to be inviting as a TA to our students. Repeat after me. How are you doing? Come on in. Glad you dropped by. Good. So be inviting means we also become welcome to our students' presence, students coming, right? So when we say that kind of expressions, we also need to make sure that our facial expressions, our body gestures are also welcoming and inviting. All right, so I only provide this one expressions to be inviting. How about you? Can you add some of expressions to be inviting during office hours of TA? Write it down on the right side of your slide 8. The next one, during office hours, some students may come to you, may come to us without even, like making an appointment or scheduling a meeting with us. So what are the tips for that? We cannot just say or ask them to go away. That won't be polite, right? So what we need to do is be explicit about the amount of time you have for the drop-in. So we have the right to tell them that we don't have much time to have a consultation with them. For example, we can say, this is a good time. I'm not expecting another student for 20 minutes or so. So we set the boundaries. We be clear and explicit about the length of time that we can provide to them. And that's completely okay. This sends out a clear signal to the students about the time frame. Yeah, so we become clear and certain about the time frame for them because they haven't scheduled any meeting with us, right? So can you add your own expressions? So imagine you are a TA, right? And then one or two of your students drop by, and it's like kind of a surprise to you because you're not expecting someone to have a consultation with you, but someone just dropped by. So what will you say to them? The next one, where to sit. We can say, why don't you pull a chair over? Repeat after me. Why don't you pull a chair over? Good. Kids, take a seat. Please have a seat. Good. So when they come to our office, we can like ask them to stand all the time, right? We need to ask them to sit down, and we can say those two expressions to them, to pull over a chair, or yeah, to let them have a seat. So if you are a TA, what will you say to your students coming to your office to tell them where to sit? Next one. Setting the climate. Repeat after me. How was Monday's quiz for you? Yes. How is your research project coming along? All right. I noticed that you raised a very good question the other day. Okay. Now your turn. Can you modify the expressions to make your own expressions to set the climate of the meeting? Or you can make brand new expressions for this function. Next one, number 5, is problem solving. Repeat after me. How do you study for this course? Good. What do you think are the key arguments advanced by X? Good. Are there other students in the course whom you know and can talk to about the course content? Good. So these kind of expressions are kind of eliciting the students to solve their problem, right? So they come to us with a problem, but we ask them first to find the problem solving by themselves, right? If you have encountered such situations, what have you ever said to your students as a way to, ask them to problem solve their problems? Write it down there, at least 2, but if you can come up with more than 2, it will be great. Stay on this slide if you haven't done filling up, the adding your own expressions. But if you're finished, let's move on to slide 11. Number 6 is offering advice. Yes, students come to our office, they want to meet us, they want to consult something with us because they need advice. Do you still remember when your students come to you to ask for an advice, and what expressions did you use at that time? You still remember that? Let me show you some useful phrases that you can use to over advise. Repeat after me. You might want to revert to. Good. Perhaps you might like to consider. Okay. I would recommend that you. Good. Have you ever thought of speaking to? Yes. Have you thought about taking a different approach? Another thing that I'd recommend is, yes, it might be a good idea to, if I were you, I would. Good. My advice would be, yes, so you continue the blanks or continue the expressions with the advices that you are offering to them, depending on the context and depending on the problems that your students arise, right? Now it's your time to add your own expressions. Do you have other expressions, be it the ones that you have ever used or haven't ever used, to over advise to your students? Well, actually, these expressions for overing advice are similar to overing advice in non-teaching setting, right? You just need to a bit modify the diction so that it will, applicable in a teaching situation. Provide at least 4. If you can come up with more than 4, then it will be better, way better. So far we have had six types of mechanics of language for holding office hours, right? We still have more. Now let's see number 7. It's about clarifying unexpressed issues or concerns. So there are, of course, issues, problems, challenges, confusions, concerns in the class, but sometimes they're unexpressed, right? So we need to clarify them. And here are some useful phrases that we can use, and repeat after me. Is there anything else that I can help you with? Good. What other concerns do you have about the project? Yes. Have I answered all your questions today? Maybe your students will say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, but they are holding some questions that they haven't asked, right? So by using such expressions, we try to clarify if there is unexpressed problems that they may still have, but they haven't expressed it to you. How about you? There are so many issues that may happen in a classroom, right? If you are a TA, what kind of expressions you will use to clarify or to find out any unexpressed problems happening in the class? Take your time. If you think you need more time to finding other expressions, that's completely okay, because you can use this material for your self-study. So self-study is all about you. So take as long as you need to complete all the activities and the exercise that I provide in my lecture. The next one is wrapping up, number 8. Repeat after me. If you have more questions as you review the material, feel free to drop by. Okay, we must wrap up in a few minutes. I am expecting another student. Good. If there's anyone else outside the door, could you please ask the person to come in? Yes. I think we have time for one more question. You can use these expressions, but please be noted that when the time is almost up, let your student know. So when you are, when you're opening consultation time with your students in your office, but if you think that the time is very limited because you have to accommodate many students and you're expecting many other students for the consultation, so let them know that the time is almost up. Their time is almost up. Let them know that they have this certain of time, this period of time, and that's completely okay. Right? So wrapping up is like telling the students that it's almost the time to end the consultation. And we need to be clear, be certain, and be firm about that, so that we won't, sacrifice other students just to accommodate 1 or 2 students only. And also be firm about the time that we have is training our students to be more prepared with what they need to consult. Sometimes what makes the consultation time long is not that they have many questions, but they just don't know what to ask, or they don't know what their problem really is, right? So they need to be prepared, at least with a list of questions they need to ask to you as a TA, or with the list of the problems that they need to consult with you, right? Okay, so now add your own expressions. You can either modify the expressions listed above, or you can make your own. Stay on slide 12 to complete the adding your own expression part. if you're ready, please go to slide 13. We are moving to section 3, still about mastering the mechanics of language, but it's about handling students' questions. Handling students' questions. It can be as challenging as handling questions from our audience in a presentation, in a departmental presentation, the one that we had in the previous lectures. Although the students sometimes, not sometimes, most of the times have, they are not in the same education level with us, but their questions can be challenging still. In a departmental presentation or in an academic seminar, when we already present our material and then Q&A session is open like that, the questions may come from a professor with more education or more, more experience from us, right? But it doesn't mean that the questions from the students cannot be challenging. It can still be very challenging, and we need to master some strategies to handle that. In teaching situations, handling students' questions involve your ability to provide your student information that they need. For that purpose, it's important to enhance your ability to spontaneously use the various strategies that are available to accomplish the task, such as restating a question to make sure that you have understood it, or to create some time for you to formulate your response. Well, actually, some of the strategies that we are going to discuss today in this part are quite similar to the ones in handling the questions from our audience in a departmental presentation. In addition, handling students' questions for teaching purposes also involves your ability to provide appropriate follow-up statements or questions that serve various teaching functions, which are making sure that everyone has heard the question in order to engage everyone in the process, modifying the question to channel students' thinking or attention, acknowledge and encouraging students' input in order to motivate their participation, and making your answer more concise for material that you have covered before or will be covering later. So there are four functions. Why is it needed to master the language, mechanics of language for handling students' questions? Because of those 4 reasons. And let's see the first function, which is to make sure that everyone heard the questions. Can you imagine that one student, say student A is asking you a question, and you don't clarify that, or you are not making sure that other students in the class understand that question, and then you go directly to the answer, and others are not engaged because they don't know what is being talked about, what is being discussed between the student, the questioner, and you. So that is why it is important to make sure that everyone has heard the question so that everyone can be engaged in the discussion. So let me start by asking you this question. What do you do in the class to make sure that all your students heard the question? So like the situation that I just mentioned, student A asks you a question, right? And you want to answer, but you need to make sure that other students in your class already know, understand, and heard the question being asked. What do you do? What do you say? Write it down on the left side of slide 15. Let's see the useful phrases that we can use. Repeat after me. Did everyone hear that X's question was? So we kind of repeat, right? That's a good question. X wants to know. Yes. I want to make sure that everyone heard you. Would you repeat your question? No. The previous 2 are about restating the question, but number 3 is about asking the questioner, the student, to repeat their question. For example, this one. What is the lab assignment for this week? And you as a teacher said, Access question is what the lab assignment is for this week. Yes, restating. Now, how about you? Can you add your own expressions to make sure that everyone heard the question just asked? Write it down there whenever you're ready. Let's continue to part B, the second function, which is to give yourself time to think. So your students ask you a question, or one certain student asks you a question, and you think that you need more time to provide a response, to formulate your response. So what do you say? And what do you do for that? Next, let's see the useful phrases. Repeat after me. Yes, I see what you're asking. You want to know, let me think. Good. Your question is, that's a very interesting question. I need to think for a bit before I answer. Last one. So you want to know, I don't know the answer to that question, but I will try to find out by the next class. All right, so all these phrases here are used to postpone the answers, to the response, right? Let me think. So asking for more time to formulate the response. And even you can use phrase number 3, which is postponing the answer until the next class, because you need more research or more reading to provide the correct answers. And that's completely okay. I have done that many times when I think I need more reference. I don't want to be misleading. I don't want to be, I don't want to provide wrong information. So I just ask for more time to have more research, more reading, and then I will provide the answer in the next class, in the next meeting. How about you? If you're the TA, what will you say? The next one, let's see C. If you are 100% certain that you understand the question, repeat after me. Your question is, good. Access question is, X is asking, good. What you are asking is, X wants to know, good. What you are asking is, an example of the conversation, can we hand in our assignments tomorrow? And the TA answered, you would like to know whether you can hand in your assignments tomorrow. Another example, how long do we have to do the assignment? And the TA responds, you would like to know how long you have to do the assignment. So only use these expressions if you are 100% sure or certain that you understand the question. But if you think you need more clarification about the question from your students, so don't use this expression, right? Now it's your time. How about you? What kind of expressions that you will use if you are 100% certain that you understand the question? Stay on slide 17 if you haven't done it, right? If you're done, let's move on to slide 18. Now, if it is the situation, if you are unsure of what the question was, previously, if you are very sure, 100% sure, then you can use those phrases. But now, if you are not that certain or sure about the question, repeat after me. Do you mean? And then continue with the question that you want to clarify. If I'm not mistaken, you'd like to know If I understand you correctly, good. I think what you want to know is, am I right? Yes. Now, how about your own expressions? Modify the expressions listed above, or you can make your own. What will you say if you are unsure of what the question from your student was? Next one, if you did not understand the question at all, so it's not just not 50% unsure, but 100% unsure. Repeat after me. Would you repeat your question, please? I didn't quite catch what you said. Yes. So in C, if you are 100% sure, in D, you are, let's say, 50, 60, 70% unsure. So you need a bit more clarification. But in E, if you're 100% not sure, so you really don't know what the student is asking about. What else can you say? Write it down there. Next one, to modify the question. Here is the example of the conversation. What's the difference between the midterm and the final? And you can modify the question this way. Do you mean relative weight? Do you mean relative weight types of questions? Let me ask that question another way. In this course, we don't need to worry about that. But what we do want to know is, in this course, we don't need to worry about that. But the question that we need to ask ourselves is, so it's to modify the questions to make it clear, or you restate the question in other wordings or other vocabulary. How about you? If you need to modify the questions, what will you say? Right. This is for 3.1. We're done with that. So it's handling students' questions by restating questions for specific purposes. The specific purposes are in 6 types, right? From A to F. Next one, we are moving to 3.2, still about handling students' questions, but it is to make your answer concise, to make it brief, and then make it effective. Let's find out. Mastering the mechanics of language, handling students' questions to make your answer concise. Repeat after me. The simple answer is, but let me explain it in a little more detail. Good. It's a complicated issue, but in simple terms, we'll be covering that issue in great detail when we get to chapter X. All right. Your question reminded everyone about what we covered 2 weeks ago when we talked about, if you recall, yes. So in here, the answer of the question from your students can be very complicated, can be very long, but to make it effective, to make it concise, we need to, simplify the answer, and we can use those phrases. Now, can you add your own expressions? How STA you will make your answer concise? Remember, you can always just modify the expressions provided there, or you can make your own. Maybe you can come up with the expressions that you once use when you are, doing TA or being TA. Stay in slide 20 if you haven't done writing your own expressions. But if you are, then move on to Section 3.3, still about handling students' questions, but now to encourage questions, to motivate your students to ask you more questions. But before I reveal the useful phrases that we can use to encourage questions from our students, let me ask you this question. How do you encourage your students to address questions in the class? Some classes are very quiet, meaning that they are not very outspoken. So when you open a Q&A, not many students participated, right? Not many students participate, not many students ask questions, just 1 and 2. So how will you encourage your students to address questions? Any questions, meaning it can be a question that's heavy or a simple one. Do you have any certain strategies? Do you have any certain tricks? That write it down there. Now for the useful phrases, let's find out. Repeat after me. Can anyone tell me what theorem we should use to solve this problem? So we ask the students and they can participate more. What do the rest of you think? They can come up with responses, statements, but they can also come up with questions for this to respond to your question, right? Can anyone tell me why? Good. Could you say a bit more about that? Good. Would you elaborate on that? Good. Could someone give another example of? Would someone like to add to that? Yes. So all those phrases here are used to, eliciting or asking more participation from the students. Well, sometimes the questions there will be responded in form of statement instead of questions, but they can also come up, the response can still come up in a form of questions too. So a question response by question. Do you have another idea for this? How to encourage students to ask more questions in your class? Write it down on the right side of slide 21. Moving on, the next one, handling students' questions to recognize students' input. So sometimes, not sometimes, maybe often, the input given in the class is not only from teacher to students, but it can also be from the student to teach to us teachers or teaching assistant or TA, right? And we need to recognize their input. Although they are students, although they have lower education background or less experience than us, but they can still provide beneficial input for us. So what do you say when you want to acknowledge input or feedback from your students? What else do you do? Write it down there. We need to appreciate them, appreciate their input, their feedback, acknowledge that, recognize that. So what do you say for that? Here are some useful phrases. X is rightly reminding us of a point of view that we have neglected. Thanks, X, for pointing that out. Excellent point. Let's look at the issue X raised. Right, so we TA or even lecturer or professor or the instructor are just human. Sometimes we forget something, sometimes we mistaken something, and it's clearly okay, 100% okay to recognize our students' input, and we can use those phrases to recognize their inputs. What else do you think can we say to recognize our students' input? There are many things that we can say, right? Just share to us, share to your friends. Next one, responses to correct answers. So students can provide you with correct answers and also incorrect answers, right? For this slide, for this part is for correct answers. The next one for incorrect answers. Now let's start from the correct answer first. How do you respond to your students' correct answer? And what else do you usually do? This question means, in addition to saying something to respond to the correct answers from our students, do you have other things that you do to respond to the correct answers? Or maybe you give a high five like that, or you do something else, or give a thumbs up. And here are some useful phrases that you can use. Repeat after me. You've got it. Good. That's precisely it. Did everyone hear what X just said? Exactly. Precisely. Right on the mark. All right. So make sure when you say those phrases, you really mean it by showing the right facial expressions, show the right body gestures. So it's just not, words of the mouth, but you really mean it. You really, responding to the correct answers and you acknowledge them. What else will you say to respond to the correct answers of your students? All right, now the opposite, responses to incorrect answers. Let me ask you first. How do you usually respond to your students' incorrect answer? What else do you usually do? Do you do something with your facial expression or body gesture or other things instead of, in addition to speaking something? And here are the useful phrases that we can use to respond to incorrect answers. That's a very good guess, but that's not it. Do the rest of you agree? Nice try, but that's not it. What do the rest of you think? So it's okay to let the students know that their answers are not yet correct, but still we acknowledge their effort, acknowledge their attempt, right? By saying that's a very good guess, nice try, good job, or many other things. But then you clarify, then you say that that's not the answer that you were expecting. What else do you think you can use? I have some notes on how to handle students' question and responses to incorrect answers. Let's take a look at it. If possible, avoid providing the correct answer right away. Although you know that the answer is not yet correct, but wait, do not go straight to the correct answer. Consider how you can involve the entire class in the question and answer, so that instead of doing all the answering yourself, you create learning opportunities for your students. Try asking different types or levels of questions based on what you have heard to facilitate depth of processing or critical thinking by your students. So that's the main goal of postponing in giving the right answers right away. We ask the student to think further, to think more critically so that they can come up with the correct answers. For strategies for handling challenging situations, refer to the previous lectures. So in the previous lectures, we have covered how to handle some challenging situations, right, in academic communication, and you can apply those strategies as well. All right, so that's about mastering the mechanics of language in handling students' questions. All right. Next one, we will come to the last section, which is section 4, Still about mastering the mechanics of language, but it's about enhancing the clarity of explanations. All right, now let's continue with the last section of this lecture, section 4. Still mastering the mechanics of language, but it's for enhancing the clarity of explanations. So previously, it's about handling questions, right? And now it's about how to make sure that the explanations we have given to our students is clear enough for them to understand. Clarity in presenting explanations is a key attribute of an instructor's effectiveness in communicating ideas, concepts, theories, and so on. Our ability to explain things in a clear and unambiguous way is critical, very important, to creating a productive learning experience for students. Researchers have established the effectiveness of various instructional techniques, such as the use of concrete examples to illustrate abstract concepts, the use of analogies from outside of classroom, and the creation of context, and so on. So the way we can clarify or to make sure that our explanations are full of clarity can be done in many ways, such as providing illustration, using analogies, providing context, and providing concrete examples, and many others. Here are 8 key techniques to get you started on developing the ability to achieve your communication goals. Number 1, provide a definition. Provide a formal definition for the term you are teaching. Yeah, this is very important, especially when we have new terminology and the terminology is very technical. So we need to make sure that it's clear for everyone. Okay. Then you can supplement it with additional information. For example, your life experiences, the practical applications of the terminology to make your explanation clear, memorable, and relevant to your students. So it's not only understandable, that's important, but it's also about how to make it relevant to our students. When it's relevant to them, it will be way easier for them to remember that and store it in their mind. So how to do that? I'll show you some useful phrases and please repeat after me. The term X is defined by blah, blah, blah as, it is important because, the dictionary defines the term X as, X is a type of Y that is related to Z, but differs from Z in, so you say the differentiation. And then how about you? Can you provide other examples of expressions to provide a definition so that your explanation is clear for everyone in your class? Next one, we can enhance the clarity of our explanations by using a practical example. Give an example from students' experience. So it's not always about our own experience, but it can also be the ones from our students. And the useful phrases that we can use are, to understand what X is, think of. Good. Can you add some other expressions? What can we say to help our students understand a certain explanations by giving a practical example? So remember, we can also use the experience from our students to make it more understandable, more relatable, more relevant, and more understandable. Next one, share a personal experience. Give an example from your experience, a story or event. So what's that? Previously, it's about the story or experience of our students. And now it's from us as the TA or as the teacher. This is what we can say. To help you understand what X is, let me share a personal experience, or let me give you an example. This is called X, which means good. What else can we say? Write down your own version. Okay, next one. We can use an analogy too to enhance the clarity of our explanations in the class. Make an analogy to some other concept that students already know. So when we provide us a new concept or a new knowledge to them that is a brand new thing for them, they need guidance. They need help to, to connect it with the knowledge they have had in their mind. So we can use analogy to help them, build the bridge between the new knowledge they just received to the knowledge they have stored in their mind. So it will help them understand our explanations way easier. Think in terms of, for example, parents, relationships, or functions similar to the concept that you are teaching. For example, you are explaining a certain concept in linguistics like that, and it's quite complicated because that's too abstract. Then you can make an analogy using, for example, fruits, or maybe the way someone does something in his or her life like that. So use an analogy that is close to your students, more understandable, so the new concept will be understood way easier. And this is the examples of phrases that we can use. The structure of X is like that of the Y, the same way that analogy, like comparison. The concept of X is analogous to, yes, how about you? What will you say to provide an analogy to enhance the clarity of your explanations to your students? Moving on next, overing comparison and contrast. Compare the term with a similar term or contrast it with an opposing term. If the term is, sometimes if the term is very technical, very contextual, that will be very abstract for our students to understand that. We can use the help of comparison and contrast to help us clarify our explanations. Here are some useful phrases that we can use. X is similar to Y because, but is different from Y because. So we provide the similarity and also difference, right? How about you? What do you think? What else can we say in offering comparison and contrast to enhance the clarity of our explanations in the classroom? Moving on. Enhancing the clarity of explanation can be done by referring to word origin. Tell your students the origin of the term. For example, repeat after me. The term X comes from the word Y, which means X is an acronym that stands for use prefix or suffix. Prefix comes from Latin. It has two parts, pre, which means before, and fix, from fixes, which means to attach. Good. So we can, analyze the word origin by helping the students to analyze the prefix, the suffix, or the other components of the language. Atherosclerosis comes from the Greek words athero, meaning taste, and sclerosis, meaning hardness. It refers to the process of condition in which. Good. So that's the example on how to revert to word origin. Do you have other examples that you can use? All right, next one. Tie together the concept of term to previously learned material or what students already know. Oh, it should be another heading, yeah, not refer to word origin. So we can enhance the clarity of explanation by tying together the concept of any terminology that already learned in the previous meetings, in the previous lectures, like that. So we make a connection. This is the new thing. We try to help the students to build connection with the ones learned previously, like that. And the example of the phrases that we can use are, the concept X is related to what we discussed or learned about blah, blah, blah last week. Yes. Do you have other examples for that? Okay, moving on next. We can enhance the clarity of explanations by providing visual means. Provide a visual illustration of the term or concept, like we provide picture or drawing or diagram or chart. I know it will be challenging, especially for me, the one that cannot draw. I cannot really draw. If I try to draw, it will result in a very, bad drawing. And I think it's too bad it can't provide visual means. So I don't think I will use this suggestion or trick because I myself cannot draw. I'm very bad at drawing. So you can try if you are very good at drawing. It will help you a lot in making your explanations clear. For example, this chart shows the relationship between, so it's using chart, right? You draw the chart on the whiteboard or provide, or draw something on the computer and then show it to your students in the classroom, like that. This diagram will help you understand. Good. And now your example. What will you say? Okay, to sum up, it's important to point out that the 8 techniques presented here contributes to creating context, which is a key to effective teaching and learning. Mastering such communication involves much more, however, than simply adding pieces of information to teaching events. So teaching is not only just adding new information again and again, but how we can making the communication with our students more relevant and more understandable to them. The context that you create with those techniques must take account of students' cognitive perceptions in relation to several levels of information, such as the connection between the current learning content and other aspects within the same content. For example, the micro context, its relation with other contents in the curriculum, the meso context, and its relation with the reality of the living world outside of the classroom, or the macro context. So in short, we need to make it relevant to their students, to the world of our students, so that the new knowledge will be understood easily, fast, and in a more meaningful way. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this slide is a wrap up for our lecture in lecture 9. And if you want to read more about the material in lecture 9, you can go to this book. I already wrote the page where I took the material from. All right. And in lecture 10, after this, it will cover the further application of the mechanics of language that we learned in this lecture 9. That's all for this lecture. That's all for today. Thank you so much for joining my lecture, my course, English for Academic Communication. I'll see you in lecture 10 with the further material of English for Academic Communication. I'll see you soon.